In today's show, we're going to go over a move that I like to call around the world unilateral banded pulls. And the reason we go over these is because we're thinking about how we can optimize our training with very few resources. And one of the resources that most people have is a set of bands. What's beautiful about these bands is that as you stretch them, you increase tension. The more tension we have on the muscle, the more we're able to grow, build, get jacked, get huge muscles, which is what we're all here for. The problem with these is that as you get closer to whatever the band is fixated on, you lose a lot of that tension. But guess what? We're a company called Barbell Shrugged. It's painful for me to say this, but barbells aren't always optimal. Dumbbells aren't always optimal. Kettlebells aren't always optimal. The most optimal situation is to have a beautiful NCAA, amazing NFL training facility that has every single option that you could ever imagine in front of it so you can get the stimulus of every single tool that is in the gym. Bodybuilders go to gyms and hit their back from 15 different ways. If you go to a functional fitness facility, they've got barbells and bumpers, and that's generally what you're left with. Everybody has bands. We've all got them in our house. The problem is we just don't know how to properly use them. And the reason that these around the world unilateral rows are so important is because we get to hit the back from so many different angles and isolate the back. So what happens when we go with a unilateral row is that we're going to be engaging much more core just to stabilize our trunk. The reason I dig this so much is because there's no way that you're going to be able to hold a barbell or a dumbbell at so many of these angles that we're going to be hitting today. So we're going to be doing it at 5. It doesn't mean that you have to stay at 5, that 5 is a magic number. The goal is that we want to be able to hit our back and work on rowing from multiple different angles. If you are interested in finding out how bands and body weight can actually be applied to muscle building, hypertrophy, there's a program in the description called Bands and Body Weight, and you can save 10% on that using the code SHRUGGED. Click on it. It's in the description. I promise you are going to put on muscle, use minimal equipment, and one of the things that we've gotten very good at is teaching people how to use the tools and resources that they have at their disposal to get them closer to their goals. That is optimal to us, getting you closer to your goals. We don't have to be fixated on specific tools, and everybody has a set of bands that you can use. Now what we want to do with these around the world rows is set the band at the very highest level directly underneath us. So the idea with a row is that we're going to be pulling an object into our body. Our elbow stays in nice and tight, our core stays engaged, ribs are down, glutes are on. And from here we just want to wrap our hand around, drop to a knee depending upon how high you are fixated, and you can pull straight down. Now, one thing that's great about the band is in the middle of any set, you can either move your hand up and increase the tension, or if you've gone too far, you can move your hand down and decrease the tension. This is all very helpful stuff so you can get the proper amount of tension at peak contraction, and you don't have to worry about changing dumbbells or barbells out in the middle of it. We start with this overhead one. It very much resembles a pull down or a lat pull down, a pull up like you would be doing in the gym. Using the unilateral piece is something that's very beneficial just because if we weren't having our core engaged, we'd be seeing a lot of bending in here because we're only pulling from one side. So as you would pull, there would be a weakening in the core. But our ability to maintain a tight core, pull down, keep that elbow in tight, and that's going to be set number 1. I recommend getting 8 to 10 of each of those just to work on a lot more of the hypertrophy side of things. You can go 10 to 12, that's also great. We're just going to be doing 5 sets of these, so once you start to get into 10s and 12s for 5 different movements back to back to back, it just becomes a lot of reps. So you want to be able to see where you're at in your training age and understand the amount of tension and the total number of reps that you're going to be putting in. You notice that I slid the bar or the band over just a little bit. So now we're kind of at this like 60-degree angle, right? And we're going to get a different pulling angle, same movement, same tension, and we're going to get 8 to 10 reps here in the same or in a different plane, but we're going to get a relatively similar stimulus from our core, the pulling, the unilateral demands of having this band and only working one side. Now from here, where the beauty is, you're never going to be able to hold a dumbbell out to the side and pull it into your body. that's where those tools become less optimal. But with the band, we can set our third one up down here. We get a little bit lower of a lat angle, and we're pulling more into our body in this direction. Another 8, 10, 12 reps, depending upon where you're at, where your strengths, where your weaknesses are. And then from here, of course, we've got 2 more, and we're just going to continue to back this down. And now we're at what would be basically a seated row. For those of you that train in a global gym, or you have a cable row machine, this is very similar to a seated row or a cable row that you would find at most corporate 24-hour corporate gym settings, right? And I can already feel that lat contracting. You'll notice that the core is tight, so we're getting that additional core stability piece, and as we pull in, we stay nice and tight. You can back that down as well, and if you even wanted to finish this off with kind of a bent row positioning, you can come down here and finish in this, or even unilateral and pulling in this side. My recommendation is to keep it to 5 or 6 of these angles. Do them all in a row. That way you're hitting around the world like we just discussed. You're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you want to go down to the ground, that's going to be number 6. And we should be able to get a complete rowing pattern throughout our entire lat. You're going to get stronger. Make sure you check out the bands and body weight program in the description for more bands, body weights, and building muscle. And we'll see you guys next week.